After the biggest political comeback in the history of the United States, Donald Trump is president once again.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Trump is only the second president in the history of the US to win two non-consecutive terms. Before him, it was Grover Cleveland in 1897. That's more than 125 years back. Trump is also the first president to hold office while facing legal indictment. While many say he has a questionable personality, I am a big fan of many of his policies. But that is not the topic of this video. In his second term, he has a lot of things planned. And as the saying goes, when America sneezes, the world catches cold. In this video, we would be looking at some of his policies and his approach towards the economy and geopolitics, and what impact that would have on India. We would look at three things in particular. Firstly, international trade, his stance on immigration, and lastly, geopolitics. And then analyze how each one of these will impact India. But before we begin, more than 95% of you looking at this video have probably not subscribed to our channel. So if you like this video or any of the other videos on our channel, guys, please hit the subscribe button. It really means a lot and it really helps immensely with the YouTube algorithm. That said, let's get started. The biggest impact of Trump's presidency, in my opinion, is gonna be seen on international trade. Trump believes that other countries take advantage of the US. Here is what he has to say about the same.
We can't continuously have other nations taking advantage of the United States like never before. And this has gone on for a long time.
What Trump really hates is having a trade deficit with other countries. For instance, while the US imports goods and services worth $550 billion from China, it only exports goods and services worth $195 billion. That means a trade deficit of $355 billion. In fact, this was the entire reason why the trade war between US and China started in January 2018, when the US began imposing tariffs and trade restrictions on China, and China followed suit by imposing trade restrictions and tariffs on US-based products. This time, Trump says he'll take it a step further by imposing a flat 60% tariff on Chinese goods and services. Now, China, as you all know, is the manufacturing hub of the world. And what a 60% tariff on all made in China products would do is that it would encourage companies to set their manufacturing bases in other countries. And India would very clearly be a beneficiary of this. By the way, I really encourage you to check out our video on the Make in India initiative. I'll attach the link somewhere in the description. Anyway, a stronger trade relationship between the US and India thus is very likely, as we also saw in the first Trump administration. But this time, Trump also has something else to say. Before getting elected in September 2014, Trump said that India is a big abuser of trade.
So when India, which is a very big abuser, he happens to be coming to meet me next week, and Modi, he's fantastic. I mean, fantastic man. A lot of these leaders are fantastic. You have to understand one thing.
India imports goods and services worth $73 billion from the US, while exporting goods and services worth $118 billion, which means a $45 billion trade surplus for us and a $45 billion trade deficit for the US. Further, India's average tariff on US goods sits at about 17%, while it is 3.3% in the case of Indian goods exported to the US. This really could be an area of conflict, and I do see the two countries meeting somewhere in between. There are three industries in India that are heavily reliant on US exports: the IT industry, the pharma industry, and the auto components industry. Let me give you some examples to paint a better picture. 52% of the revenue of TCS or Tata Consultancy Services comes from the US. This figure is 59% in the case of Infosys and 50% in the case of HCL. The story is the same for pharma companies as well, but a little lesser. 32% of Sun Pharma's revenue comes from the US and 30% of Cipla's revenue. Further, with regards to auto components, 27% of all Indian auto components exports goes to the US, which means 27% of the entire revenue of the auto component industry comes from the US. So far, Trump's tariffs and trade restrictions have only been impacting goods, which means the manufacturing sector overall, like pharma and auto components, and not the services sector, which is our IT and BPO industry. If services get targeted as well, then these industries could suffer as well. But honestly, that seems very unlikely because the tech and finance industry of the US is heavily reliant on Indian cheap talent. By the way, this also brings us to the next topic. which is Trump's stance on immigration. Now, as we all know, moving to the US, working in the US, and pursuing the American dream has very unfortunately been the Indian dream for a long time. As of 2024, 330,000 Indian students went to study in the US, 280,000 Indians were issued the H-1B visa in the US, and nearly 100,000 Indians tried to illegally cross the US borders. They were caught and then expelled. The one thing that Donald Trump has made very clear is that he is against illegal immigrants, as honestly any sane country should be. Otherwise, you'll probably just end up like Europe. But where things really get interesting is with regards to the H-1B visa. For those of you who don't know, H-1B visa is a way for foreigners to get entitled to stay and work in the US. In 2016, when Trump first got elected, he criticized the H-1B visa, calling it a means for companies to replace American workers with lower paid foreign employees. But this time, things could be different. 3 core members of his team and cabinet include Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy as heads of Department of Government Efficiency and Sriram Krishna as White House policy advisor on AI. All 3 of them advocate increasing visas for highly skilled employees. Basically, all 3 of them encourage increasing the number of H-1B visas. Now, here is the catch. Even if there is an increase in restrictions on H-1B visa, I feel it's going to be an opportunity because it would mean more outsourcing of work to countries like India. A, because there are not many Americans who are capable of doing these jobs, and B, because those of who that are very expensive. On the other hand, if H-1B visa restrictions are eased out, it will be very beneficial for Indians because Indians are the largest beneficiaries of the H-1B visa scheme. In 2014, Indians accounted for nearly 75% of all the H-1B visas issued in the US. This becomes very beneficial to us in the form of remittances, which basically means Indians that go out and live over there will be sending more money home back to India. That said, let us now move to the third factor, which is geopolitics. In terms of geopolitics, there are 2 things to talk about. Firstly, Trump's peace through strength approach, and secondly, his relationship with NATO.
Peace through strength. They didn't want to mess around. It would have never happened in Ukraine. Russia would have never gone in. Would have never happened. The recent attack on Israel would have never happened. 0% chance that was going to happen. They see a weak president in our country, and they did something that was unthinkable. So we're going to have peace through strength. We're not going to have to fight. So
now the thing about his peace through strength strategy is that either things would be very peaceful or they would become very ferocious with the US entering a lot of the wars. This is what Trump allegedly said when he was asked about how he would deal with Russia's attack on Ukraine.
Trump suggested that if he were the president of the United States, he would bomb Moscow and Beijing if the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine or China attacked Taiwan. The remarks surprised some of his campaign donors.
To say the least, that is quite interesting, won't you say? Now moving to NATO. NATO is the world's largest military alliance comprising of 23 countries, with the US being its strongest leader, contributing 16% to NATO's total budget. In 2006, a target was set for each of the NATO countries to spend at least 2% of their GDP on their defense budget. But as of 2023, only 11 of 23 countries have met these targets, with US far superseding their target at 3.5% of their GDP. And guess what? Trump is not happy with this. He believes that the others are not paying their fair share.
NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States.
But if the US leaves the NATO, it will most likely lose its geographical presence from the perspective of military in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. But what this would also mean is increased collaboration with other entities such as the Quad, which comprises of the US, Japan, Australia, and of course, India. Further, even if his relationships with NATO were to weaken, India was still said to be a big beneficiary of that. So overall, from all these 3 angles, from the perspective of international trade, geopolitics, and stance on immigration, I see it as a win for India. Some of the other things that too could play in favor of India is firstly Trump's stance on crude oil. When we think of crude oil, we usually think of Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE. But did you know US has the largest recoverable oil reserve in the world? It often doesn't get utilized because of environmental reason. But Trump wants to drill, baby, drill.
We will drill, baby, drill.
An increased supply of oil from the US would mean a fall in crude oil prices, which is a big positive for India because crude oil is our biggest import as a country. That said, I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, definitely hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching.